Okay, it's week 5 and we're talking about theatre and the performing arts. So, a couple of key points, or maybe better yet, key questions I want you to think about. So, the first one is, how do we offer audiences something unique compared to mediated entertainment? So, in the last couple of weeks, we looked at film, TV, music, and video games and such. How do we offer audiences something unique compared to those forms of entertainment? How do we get them away from screens and into theatre halls? Something else to think about in this lecture while we go through what theatre is and the various forms of theatre is to think about how do you balance your artistry or a vision, artistic vision, with the need to make money and to survive. And we'll talk about those debates in more detail. And then the third thing is, how do we engage and grow theatre and performing arts audiences? It's something that needs to happen more in Australia. We see declining audiences, but the main question then for you as producers and professionals working in that space, how do we grow the audiences and make a living? So what type of theatre categories do we have? Well, we typically have what we call main stage, which refers to companies or and large audiences. So these include productions in Broadway or West End. Then we have independent, which we typically talk about companies or productions that are not typically tied to a venue, and they involve much smaller companies. We also refer to co-productions, so collaborations between more smaller or independent theatre productions or theatre companies that partner up with larger companies to bring their creativity to the main stage. So we'll be looking more at community and fringe theatre later on in the lecture. But my question to you is, what makes theatre special in the first place? I asked you the question is, how do we attract theatre audiences away from screens and digital devices? So there's this idea that theatre provides and specializes in the dramatic arts, right? And more to that, it's live. So there's a sense of immediacy. So the performers and the consumption of entertainment, the production and the consumption of entertainment is happening in real time. Audiences are in the moment with performers. So, and these performances depend on the audience to be present to work. There's also an idea that although performances of a show strive to be consistent somewhat, they will inevitably have different subtleties or different variations. For example, and I'm talking mostly about the audience, so each audience would bring a different vibe, a different cultural set of understandings to a show. So each audience is unique. Each venue would also provide a different atmosphere as well. So as such, a performance can never truly be recreated. So let's talk about Broadway. So when you think about Broadway, we often talk about 40 professional theatres with over 500 seats in the New York Theatre District. So these are the organizations that own most of those theatres. It's quite interesting that you see Disney and who owns the New Amsterdam Theatre have got one of the biggest theatres, or they own a large number of seats. So the average ticket in Broadway costs $89, but premium orchestra seats range between $400 and $600. So you have to think about, how do you justify that much money for an audience? You don't go to a cinema paying that much. You don't go to a music concert paying that much without having to meet those performers. So, like I said before, it's the highest form of commercial theatre with well-known performers and open-ended runs. And what I mean by open-ended runs is that the shows will keep running based on the amount of interest it generates. There's no limit. So almost half Broadway shows are plays. However, more revenue is actually generated by musicals. So because it's mainstream theatre, it's not designed to be experimental. It's designed to appeal to a larger audience. The size of the audience is limited by the capacity of seating. So it means that if something is popular, a show can run for decades because there's so many people trying to watch that show, and there's only a limited capacity. It keeps going and going, or it can keep going and going. And more revenue can be generated through extending the shows into ones that tour globally. Or you can sell the rights and someone else can produce the show and you get the royalties from that. So my question to you, how else do shows generate revenue? One of the things Broadway shows do, and it's fairly common now, is to generate revenue through branded merchandise. So I'm talking about the CDs, DVDs, official booklets, toys, clothing items, anything that is branded with the show's intellectual property. Let's have a look at the history of Broadway sales. Now tell me, what do you notice about this table? I think the first thing to say is that there are more tickets being sold over the years. So you 9 million in the 1980s up to 12 million in 2010 onwards. However, you can see here that while it's only 9 million and there's only a difference of 4 million roughly, or 3 million between 1980 and 2010, have a look at the difference in terms of how many millions in revenue that shows have generated now. It's different. So this indicates that the ticket prices are rising. Let's have a look at this graph. So what does this tell us about the state of the theater in Broadway anyway? You can see here that on the left-hand side where it's more recent, you can see that the attendance is growing. So is the revenue. The attendance of specials might be declining or stagnant, but it's relatively growing. One of the other interesting things you can see here is the number of weeks that shows are running for is increasing. So more audiences, more playing weeks, more revenue. Something else that's quite interesting is here, you can see a decline though in the number of new shows from 46 down to 37 roughly. Okay, let's now talk about Broadway audiences. Broadway audiences are often 33% locals and 67% tourists, and this can include domestic tourists from other parts of North America. So it's often that these audiences are repeat customers. So 60% of audiences attend at least 2 shows per season, and the average theater goer attends 4 shows. So a very small amount of the audience attends 15 or more shows, and that accounts for 32% of all tickets sold. We know that women make up 68% of the audience, and that the audience overall is typically affluent individuals. Now, we also know that the average Broadway theatergoer age is decreasing. So from 48 in 2000 to 44 years in 2014 to 2015. The ticket sales are trending in the last 5 years to a younger, less affluent audience. They're not regulars. So you need to think about, if you're working in this space, how can you create that behavior? So the types of shows that people go to see more are the plays. So they have high patronage, but musicals attract less patronage. But as we saw before, they are generating more revenue. So that might be that the name of brand musicals might be much more expensive, or the ticket prices might be higher. So let's now talk about West End. So in West End, there is 39 professional theatres roughly, owned by these groups here. And the largest of those is the Really Useful Group. Now, again, West End is popular among tourists, and the average ticket price is roughly £40. Now, I did talk a little bit about how Broadway shows And also West End shows are generating revenue mostly through the shows in those specific theatre districts. However, they can extend or generate more revenue by touring, by licensing their productions, going on tour, and that way they can bring their show to more or a larger audience, so they can increase those merchandise sales and enhance the name of their brand and bring that to make it more accessible for a global audience. Can you name the person who is most associated with this? If you said Andrew Lloyd Webber and the Really Useful Group, you'd be correct. So it's a really good example of how they originated in theatre and concert production, but they also are able to, because they have created that many shows, license their IP. So out of their shows, they generate revenue also through records, music publishing, through films, so film performances, all their merchandise, digital sales, and they also own a number of theatres in West End. They own all their intellectual property and copyright. So Phantom of the Opera has been running for approximately 27 years, seen by over 130 million people in 145 different cities, 27 countries. And that has generated over that time $6 billion in revenue. And their other production, Cats, has made a 3,500% return on investment. You can also see that there is a growing market or an expansion of musical theatre in Asia. So there are translations of these existing productions for different audiences. So there are similar theatre sizes and ticket prices. There is you can see here that there is a growth or a growing interest in the Asian market for theatre. Phantom of the Opera in Shanghai sold out 5,000 tickets in 5 hours. And there's also a trend in Korea as well, that the Korean audiences are dominated by young people. That could be attributed to an increase in disposable income amongst young people and young professionals. So you can see that there's a pushing beyond traditional theatre into arena shows so that you can increase the audience sizes and merchandise. So when we talk about off-Broadway and off-West End, we're talking about theatre that occupies a different space. It attracts a different audience seeking to distinguish themselves from the commercial tastes of others. So they are professional theatre venues, but they are less than 500 seats, situated near Broadway and West End. So not in the heart, but they're on the peripherals, on the sidelines. So regional theatre, consisting of commercial and non-profit theatres, have professional or semi-professional productions outside those major theatre districts. Now, as I said before, that you can see here a difference in the style of theatre that is performed or produced in these theatres. So it's often non-commercial plays, musicals and reviews. And this, you could say, is more of a reaction to the commercialism of Broadway and West End. So you can argue that all they're trying to do here is differentiate themselves in a market, because they could not put on the exact same plays as what's happening in Broadway and West End and attract the audience. So they have to think differently. They need to try new and untested work and become highly experimental to provide audiences with a unique proposition. Okay, so let's talk now about community and fringe theatre. So this is often non-commercial theatre, which is supported by arts grants and government subsidies. These things that keep the ticket prices and production costs low so that they can actually occur or can actually be produced. So they're often small-scale, non-professional theatre productions located in non-traditional venues. So the emphasis here is that they are made for and by local communities, and there's often no collaboration with professionals whatsoever. One of the good things about it is that because there's more agency or more control. It serves as an artistic outlet for individuals to try material. Okay, let's talk about fringe theatre. So fringe theatre often uses a mix of traditional and non-traditional venues. So it can use repurposed spaces, the streets, and theatre halls. And there is a wide range of performances, such as dance, comedy, music, burlesque, performance, and street art, and street performers, sorry. With this type of theatre, there is a strong audience focus. They rely on creating spectacle and engaging and interacting with their audiences. And there are huge international festivals around this style of theatre. For example, the Edinburgh Festival Fringe is the world's largest arts festival. In 2015, spanning 25 days and featured 50,000 performances of over 3,000 shows in 313 venues. So there's a huge amount of diversity, and that's what attracts audiences to this stuff. With independent theatre, it's usually run by smaller companies. Again, you have a wide range of performances, and it can be more experimental compared to commercial theatre. They're not bound to any particular venue, but they do rely heavily on subsidies and funding from the government. And here in this space, you see a collaboration between professionals and pro-am, which means professional and amateur. So the types of people that are moving from amateur into professional space. In this space, they can learn from the professionals they're engaging with. So with independent theatre, because they're independent companies and they're more experimental, one of the things that they need to do is to focus on the creation of new artwork, pushing artistic boundaries. And that's an important part of the industry. Because of these new types of work and new styles of narrative, storytelling and creation of drama, that medium and major theatre companies often stage co-productions with independent companies. So it's kind of like a breeding ground or a development ground for great ideas. And the Queensland Theatre Awards, also known as the Matildas, they are dominated by independent and state theatre company productions. Okay, let's talk more about the arts now. So when we think about the arts, we think of not only just performances like in theatre, but we think about events, festivals, ballet, opera, dance, art galleries, and museums. The arts are seen as high culture, but not entertainment. The idea here is that the arts focus on artistry and the power to move emotionally and uplift people. So there's this idea, art for art's sake. It's not a commercial, there is not a drive for commercialization. So the arts are an important part of culture that need to exist. So it helps us to feel emotions and gets us to engage our thinking on certain topics. So like I said before, it's less commercially driven than other entertainment sectors, but it also has a longer history. Before screen recorded media existed, live theatre was one aspect that one way audiences were entertained. For these reasons, investing in the arts is seen as investing in culture for the people. So it helps us foster a sense of identity, community. Arguably, having a diverse range of entertainment options, so the more commercial or the more artistic, means that there's more choice for audiences who might get sick of commercial entertainment. However, the performing arts, like any other form of entertainment, needs to balance artistic expression with commercial realities. So the bottom line and profit is important. Careers depend heavily on the attendance and ticket sales. One of the sources of revenue for the arts are through government subsidies, sponsorships, box office sales, merchandise, and subscriptions. So theatre subscriptions. Now, talking more about subsidies, film, TV, and theatre are subsidized by the government to keep production and promotional costs low. So it's not only the arts, so you see more commercial things like film and TV. So when Joe Dillon from Screen Queensland came in, she was telling us how the film and TV sector need money from the government to develop or fund their productions. So it happens across a range of entertainment sectors, not just the arts. And without funding, it is much harder for these productions in film, in theatre, to get off the ground. So a while back, there was funding cuts to the Australia Council for the Arts. Then Minister for the Arts, George Brandis, cut $105 million from the budget. And that had a huge impact and repercussions on the theatre industry within Australia. And so that happened in roughly between 2013 to 2015. And it's only now that we're starting to see there's been backpedaling on this. And now that there's $80 million will be returned to the Australia Council for the Arts. Creating arts or performing arts is a high cost. There is a high cost associated with it, rather. A high cost in terms of acquiring rights, acquiring resources, hiring the venue, all the designers, that sort of thing. Especially in terms of when you think about productions that go on tour, there's a huge cost there. So the initial setup costs or the capital costs can be called sunk costs because you invest a lot of money to create the initial production. It's also highly labor intensive. There's a lot of effort and coordination that goes into the creation of arts. So some of the key issues for the arts, especially in Australia, are the declining and stagnant patronage. It's not growing at the rate, nearly as quick rate as other types of entertainment. So you see digital entertainment like YouTube and things like Spotify have a huge increase, whereas we're not seeing that increase in theatre. In Australia anyway. And that could be due to there's a limited awareness of what theatre is and all the different styles and genres and aesthetic content that it provides. And there is also a negative perception here that the theatre is only for older audiences, the theatre is only for the more educated people. So if you're a producer of theatre, you need to think about how can we change all that? What sort of steps are you going to take? You need to also consider that there is a high price for the arts. So the high production costs means that you need to cover those costs. And I've talked a little bit about how you need to think about content, especially because if one thing that we've noticed is content is king. So you need to make sure that content appeals to the audience enough for you to make money and have commercial viability. So some things that the arts are doing are things like this. So Goma is having an exhibition about the concept art and storyboarding art of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So reading from the website, it says that this exhibition offers a glimpse into the work of production designers, storyboarding and pre-visualization artists, costume and prop designers, as well as visual effects artists. The interactive elements throughout the exhibition will let visitors delve even further into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And theatres like the Manchester Royal Exchange have understood that they need to connect with more ordinary people. So they ran a survey and there was a number of things that they realized the audience wanted from a theatre. So other than connecting more with ordinary people, some of the other things were that audiences wanted theatres that everyday people can afford to go to. They want theatres where everyone feels welcome to attend. We need to find out ways of bridging that gap. One of the other ways that theatre is innovating is through this idea of immersive theatre. So it is less conventional theatre. There is no traditional theatre setup. Oftentimes, immersive theatre occurs or is situated in repurposed warehouses or rundown buildings that have been done up or that have been redesigned to suit a theatre performance. So because there is no theatre, no actual theatre, there is more opportunity for the audience to explore and become encompassed in the narrative world by walking around in these spaces. So the idea here is that the narrative or the performance is really driven by the audiences and their interaction with the space and with the performers in that space. And the reading talked about Punch Drunk UK as a really good example. And they do things like large-scale settings, like I talked about those rundown warehouses as such. And you'll see here on the right, this poster is for Sleep No More, which is a reimagining of Shakespeare's Macbeth. Has also done The Crash of Elysium, which is more of a sci-fi kind of narrative. And the types of things that they have in this production makes it seem more of a live video game. So with video games last week, it was more of a virtual experience, whereas this immersive theater setting here allows you to make the video game a reality, and in that way it's immersive. Now, I talked about how the narrative is driven by audiences, and this is partly due to the fact that there are no set narratives and the stories aren't linear like they are in more traditional theatre. And it relies on the audiences to interact with the spaces, interact with performers. So it's more of a exploratory, adventure-based experience. It's almost like you choose your own adventure. Some of the other ways that theatre is trying to draw in new audiences is through branded musicals. And Disney is quite good at this as well. Or they've made a huge strategic push for this style of content to appeal to younger or new audiences. Their main source of content is adaptations from their intellectual property, and it started with Beauty and the Beast in 1994 and continued with Lion King in 97. And then you can see here a number of those other things that they've done. Now, The Lion King has surpassed Phantom of the Opera to become the highest grossing musical of all time, in roughly $6 billion in revenue. And that's only over the course of 20 years, whereas Phantom of the Opera has been going on since the 70s. Disney also make money through merchandise, licensing shows to community theater and schools. So they'll take a cut of the revenue generated there. Okay, let's now talk about theater production. So theater production usually happens over a specific period of time. And once you have the core collaborators, the writer, director, designers, producers, you are then actively working to expand beyond those people. So you're trying to find performers, trying to find backstage and front of house crew. You need to work with venue managers to find the suitable venues. So when you take your core concept or idea to the stage, you need to think, or the production team needs to think about managing time, people, and your budget. So here's an overview of what we're going to look at in the next 2 slides, all the way from scheduling and down to closing the show. So with scheduling, it's obvious that the producer needs to make sure that it opens on time, on schedule, when it's advertised to. So in a larger show, the producer will delegate tasks to a team. On a smaller scale shows, there's just one producer that needs to manage everything. It's very important, as we've talked about in previous lectures, that you need to have a schedule worked out for how you will actually produce the entertainment. Meetings are important here to keep the team up to date and synchronized. And this is mostly important, or more important rather, during rehearsal time. And during these times, you'll need to look for relevant issues of the production that could cause further difficulties down the track. And when you have meetings, it's usually around discussions about the sets, costumes, music, that sort of thing. It's also important to keep up this communication during meetings and to have them regularly to make sure that everyone's on the same page moving forward. This is especially important for larger shows, larger budgets, big stage, a lot of moving parts that need to be coordinated. So when we talk about the design process, we're actually talking about the period where there's a creative dialogue that occurs between designers, the director, and the producers. And that team comes up with determining the look and feel of the production within the time constraint and within the budget constraint. So you think about things such as set, costume design, lighting, and sound. So you need to ask yourself as a producer, does this concept work within the space that we've been given? Does this concept or certain elements of the show work for the overall vision for the show? And again, like I said, you need to make sure that your design elements and your creativity work within the budget and for practicality. So if you're going to go on tour and have multiple venues, you need to be prepared for, or you need to be adaptable for different situations. Not everything will exactly happen the way you want it to happen. So during rehearsal time, you have scheduled run-throughs of the show with or without technical. So that is just the actors on stage without all the lights, makeup, and costumes, or with all that. It is also during this period of time that you need to ensure that the cast are introduced to each other, preferably at the start, and that you have a read-through session to see how all these actors are going to, how that cast is going to work together so that they get comfortable with each other in character. As a producer, you're going to need to trust a director's judgment with rehearsals. Even if the process is extended or shortened, they'll know what's needed to make that creative vision work. It's also a good idea to make sure that most of the production design is done as early as possible so that you can insert all those elements into the narrative or to the actual performance, not have to tweak it in later parts. For example, if you have it done early, you'll be able to find more issues much faster or much earlier and have time to fix them. This is especially vital for when scenes involve actors interacting with certain props or the sets and need fast costume changes. So all that stuff will be smooth if you have all the logistics worked out early. So while this is happening, you need to have programs and merchandise sorted early. So you need to plan in advance and make sure that you have enough lead time to develop the programs and also the merchandise for sale when the show commences. So the things you might be thinking about are clothes, accessories, the soundtrack, books, pictures, artwork, posters, and printed versions of the script. Now, you have to think about your production team is not going to do all that. All that will be handled by another company or many other companies. So you need to work with them and they'll have certain lead times or production times to create those goods for you. So that has to happen in advance as well, as much as possible. Merchandise works well with long-running shows. There is a certain brand loyalty and a strong audience for recognized or well-recognized theater shows. So technical rehearsals involve running short sections repeatedly until the cues are in line with the action and everything looks and sounds right. So essentially this requires a massive team effort and pinpoint accuracy and coordination between the backstage and front of house crew and the performers. So you could say it's almost like running military drills, and what you're looking for are issues that might prop up. You're looking for, if you've got special effects and any rigging, you need to look for safety concerns that need to be addressed. So here, the emphasis is on the technical, not the vision, not the creative. You're making sure everything runs in lockstep. So when we think about rehearsals, there are some key terms to think about. So you need to make sure that all the lighting is in the right place, the right time. You've got the right colors. You need to create the lighting show for the overall production. Specific scenes will have specific sequences of lighting. You need to make sure that the sound effects and music have their preliminary levels or the volume tweaked during these technical rehearsals. And the area from which the producers and the director monitor this, the final rehearsals, is called the production desk. And that's where they'll hear the communication between the crew and technical teams. So dress rehearsals are when you have an emulation of the show as it would appear in front of an audience. Full lights, music, effects, performance, and costume. So one of the things you need to look at here is how does the show play without stopping, making sure that everything is cohesive, coherent, coordinated. You'll also be able to get an idea of the actual running length of the performance. And it's also a great opportunity to have photographers come in and take photos of your performers. So preview performances is the next step up, when you have the show play in front of an actual audience. But this audience has cheaper ticket prices, and that encourages attendance. So this allows the cast to settle into their roles with all their gear, and the previews have creative and marketing importance. So those photographs I was talking to you about, here's another chance. You're also able to invite critics to review the performances. So opening night is the first performance after the previews. So here's when you're organized for guests, investors, more press, more critics, VIPs, and a paying audience. So this is a high pressure environment, but when it's all done, it's a celebration for everyone involved with that show. And again, you're always looking for opportunities to market or communicate this production to a larger audience. So when we talk about a fixed run show, that's when we refer to a show that has a set time limit on a venue, or a set time limit for when the performances will start and then occur. Open run shows refer to the idea where a show will continue on and on as long as there is demand for it. So when a show is running, it's usually the stage management team that will make sure everyone is cued correctly and that the actual performance itself in the moment runs smoothly, or runs accordingly, or runs to plan. So the producers will get show reports and in those reports, any issues will be identified. And the producers then, so it's essentially making sure that the producers are able to stay in touch with how the show is performing, because they often may already start working on another project in another place. But if needed, they'll need to come back and inject energy back into the show. So on tour, you need to think about how new venues will raise certain issues or demands on the performance or on the production. So when you're working at new theaters, you have a limited amount of time to launch after rehearsals. So when you're moving from place to place, your time is constrained much more than if you were at the one place in the one time. It also means that there's more setup times or bump in time. There's more time spent bumping in and bumping out of every single venue. And that is a laborious task. And each venue is different. They'll have different facilities and things that you may or may not be able to pull off that need to happen for your production. Something else you have to do, something else you need to consider are these one night engagements where you will have the first preview, the opening night, and the closing all in one, only for that time. But no matter what venue you're working at, if you're on tour, you need to ensure consistency. So the producer should view each performance at the new venue to make sure that there are no issues, or to take notes and make sure in future that there are no issues. So when you're packing up, it's referred to as bumping out, leaving the theater, physical equipment, returning everything to storage. I've talked about open-ended runs for strong ticket sales, and early closures are when the production isn't attracting enough audiences. There's this loss of revenue and it can't sustain yourself. You're not staying above, you're not covering the costs of the performance. And early closures can also be replaced. Early closures can also be forced if there's no replacement for the loss of a well-known star performer. So when you close a production, it represents the end of employment for a period of time until you find the next project, until you find the next production to work on. And it's only at this time that you are able to calculate the final profits of the show. Now here's a good case study in something that didn't do so well in the final profits. So the musical adaptation of the Spider-Man comics, the TV show, the movies, was Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. So it was the most expensive theatrical production in history at a cost of $75 million to set up or to establish. It ended with a 3-year run in January 2014 with $212 million in ticket sales. And it was the 16th highest grossing show in the history of Broadway. However, it accumulated a historic $60 million in losses. So you're thinking, how the hell did it lose money if it made 212 million in ticket sales? So we'll get to that in a moment, but some of the problems with this show were the technical challenges and delays in making this vision come to life. So there were a number of cast injuries, cracked vertebrae, broken wrists, skull fracture, concussions, crushed leg. And that's because Spider-Man, it requires that grandeur, that spectacle that can only be pulled off with acrobatic and aerial effects or sequences. Now, the acrobatic and aerial work was unprecedented for Broadway at that time. And there was also an internal struggle for the creative control or the vision of the show, which led to the loss of director Julie Taymor. And that's coupled, so all these issues are coupled with negative reviews from critics. But the thing that killed it most was its unsustainable budget. Its high capital investment, which was $75 million, plus high weekly production running costs, which were about $1 million per week. And that meant that there was often times where the weekly production costs exceeded the ticket sale revenue. And they also had to make repayments on multi-million-dollar priority loans that the producers took out with their investor, or took from their investor. Now, Spider-Man, despite the closure or the end of the Spider-Man saga, there was rumored to be a Las Vegas show. So despite those major losses, they were going to do a Las Vegas residency in 2015. And there was planned extensions into Germany because they thought they could there would be a larger opportunity for profit and larger audiences in those spaces. However, this was not to be. Okay, let's talk more about local theatre. And I want you to think about, because this is something we'll discuss in the class, have a think, what are the main theatres in Brisbane that you know of? How large are they? And what are some of the prominent theatre companies in Brisbane? But I think the most important question is, why is the branding of a venue important and what does it entail? The point I'm getting at here is that each venue is known for a particular type of theatre and therefore attracts certain or different demographics from each other. So for example, the Brisbane Powerhouse has a bar and restaurant, multiple theatres and open stages. Here, they are known for their emphasis on new and exciting work, cabaret, comedy, touring international fringe artists. So family or friends can go to the Powerhouse, that venue, have a drink, some dinner, enjoy a show, then go to another drink and listen to some live music. The main point is that as a venue, the Powerhouse is offering a night out, a full experience, a holistic experience. So it comes down to staging the right production at the correct venue and then leverage the brand of that venue to reach an audience.